All right, so hi, my name is Jeff French, and I am not a Ruby developer. so, uh, what? Thank you. So, yeah, but I am here to talk about a background processing system called Faktory. So, what is Faktory? Faktory is a background processing system. It is actually written by Mike Parham of Contribsys, who wrote Sidekick. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Sidekick. This one is written in Go. It is backed by Facebook's RocksDB, which is basically a database that you can embed inside your binary, inside the same process. And it is language agnostic. So basically what Faktory does, it's a background job processing system where you can, from your process, send some job that can either be executed immediately by some worker or maybe scheduled. It handles things like if your job fails, it will automatically go into a retry loop that you can kind of control a little bit, and eventually, go all the way into a job either being successful or completely dying off. And it lets you handle any kind of background tasks, like Jeremy said, maybe sending notifications, sending an email to a user, doing some sort of out-of-band, data manipulation or, analytics calculating, stuff like that. So you're probably saying to yourself, gee, that sounds like Sidekick. It does. And when we take a look at the UI, you're going to go, boy, looks like Sidekick. If it sounds like Sidekick and it looks like Sidekick and it smells like Sidekick, why not Sidekick, right? So the answer to that for all you Ruby and Rails developers is if you are on a pure Ruby stack, there's not a lot of motivation to move off of Sidekick to Faktory immediately, unless you're facing some of the limitations that Sidekick that actually inspired the development of Faktory to begin with. If you are sending your jobs from a Ruby or Rails process and you're processing them with a Ruby or Rails process, yeah, Sidekick is already kind of working. It's already there. Now, Sidekick does hit some limitations that are really based on the way it has to interact with Redis across the network that make either some things really slow, or like if your Sidekick instance has a truckload of jobs and you need to do some sort of operation that actually reorders them, and you have to get all that from Redis and do something client-side and send it all back. If you've done these things before, you know that they're painful and they're not great. And there are even some limitations on what kind of features you can implement in Sidekick based on the way it has to interact with Redis across the network. That's what led Mike to start, working on Faktory and design it with its own internal process, database, so that it could not be constrained by those things. So that's enough talk. Let's look at it. So if we go look, the first thing we'll do is we'll just take a quick look at the Faktory dashboard. Any Sidekick users in the house? Does that look familiar? It does have a different logo, so that's different. But yeah, so you can see it's very much inspired by Sidekick. Sidekick wasn't exactly broke in a lot of ways. There's a lot of good things about it. And a lot of those good concepts and even UI seem to have just been pulled right over to Faktory. So let's take a look at a scenario where we want to process some background jobs. Now, to make this interesting, one of the things you can do, I mentioned that Faktory is language agnostic, right? Which means that it's not tied to Ruby like Sidekick is. It communicates with a lightweight network protocol between the client and the server that's very much similar and inspired by Redis. And it just uses JSON-based payloads, which means that you can have clients that can either send jobs or process jobs theoretically and technically in any language. So an interesting scenario for that might be this. Let's say, sure, Rails is the right choice for your web app, and that's where you're going to queue up your jobs from, but maybe your job is something that either needs to run really fast or is very difficult to do in Ruby or slow to do in Ruby, and you'd rather use something like Golang or Elixir or JavaScript or .NET if that's what's, happens to be the right tool for the job, maybe. So Faktory enables you to do that, right? The same way that you would with Sidekick in Ruby, you can now do that without being constrained by language choice on either end of the spectrum. So let's take a look at a sample app. So we have here a very simple, as you can see, super simple Rails app for our carpet store. Okay, so in our scenario, we have a carpet store, and occasionally we're going to put things on sale. Whenever we're going to put rugs on sale, we need our guy in the back, Roy, to go grab the rugs and bring them up front, right? So whenever we do that, we're going to send a request. We're going to say, hey, this rug is going on sale, so we're going to queue up a job, and then Roy in the back is going to grab that job and bring the rugs up front for us. So let's take a quick look at what the code looks like for that. So this is our server-side code. On the right, we have our factory job. So I've defined this, I've required in factory, I've inherited from factory job, I've set which queue I want this to go into, and I just have right now just an empty perform function. Since I'm not actually going to do the work on the Ruby side, I don't actually need any implementation in here. This is really just a helper class to help queue up the job. Now on this side, I have added into my rug model an after commit hook that says queue up my job. And basically all it does is it says, hey, is this one on sale? So anytime we create or update a job or a rug, if we have marked that it's on sale, then we're going to queue a job. So I just say stock pull job dot perform async and pass it in the parameters. And we can see that our job expects style and color, so I pass in style and color. Now, Roy's a little bit different than our other process. Roy is a Golang process because Go is definitely the best way for us to pull rugs off of a shelf. It's way more efficient at it, so that's why we're using that. And so here I've written a pretty simple Golang worker process for this. So the real bulk of it here is this pull stock method, and it takes a context that is our worker and basically just a spread out array of a slice of args for whatever gets passed into it. And all we're doing here is just some real simple, just logging out, hey, we're working on this job, here's the context, here's the arguments it was called with, and then we've got our code to actually handle this and say, oh, hey, we pulled the stock, or maybe we ran into an error of some kind. And in our main method down here, all we do is say, hey, let's start a new worker manager from the factory worker Golang client and register our pull stock method to handle the stock pull job. Notice this stock pull job matches the name of my job I'm queuing up here in the Ruby side. And we can have a concurrency of 20, so we can pull a lot of rugs down if we need to. And we tell it which queues we're watching, and that's it. So let's see it in action. If I come over here, you can see I've already got my factory server running down here. And I can start up my Golang worker process, and it's going to be sitting here. So great, it's watching for jobs in the stock jobs queue. So if we go back to our Rails UI, and let's say we're going to put this blue shower rug on sale. So I simply grab this, I mark that it's on sale, and I update it. And if we go back over here, we will see, hey, looky there. First we can check in our UI and see what happened. So in our factory UI, we can see that we processed one job. It happened too fast. We couldn't go examine it in the in-queued or retry queue. And if we look at our Golang worker process, we can say, hey, look, it was called with, okay, yeah, it was called with args of shower and blue for the color, or the style and the color. And yeah, and then Roy reported back, hey, good job. I pulled those rugs. We're ready for the shower rug sale. So now let's go take a look at another one. Let's say that we are going to ask Roy to pull all the off-white Persian shag rugs and put them on sale. And when we do that, we come over here and see, oh no, Roy reported we're all out of the off-white Persian. They threw an error. And if we look in our factory job UI, we can see that that has been queued up for a retry. So because the job returned an error, it automatically puts it into the retry queue, and it's going to try it again less than a minute from now. It may have already happened, who knows. We're going to tell it to retry right now, so okay. It'll retry in a minute, or I can tell it, hey, no, go do it right now. Now that job has been in-queued in our stock jobs queue. It's already been pulled off the queue. But hey, Roy failed again. He's hard-coded to fail on that. So that eventually will just go into a retry loop that will eventually end up in the job being completely dead. because it'll never actually pass because it's hard-coded not to. But as we can see, it's going to keep retrying and keep retrying until it hits its retry threshold, and that's configurable. And I can see how many times it's happened. And as you can see, it kind of naturally backs it off, just like Sidekick does. So it says, I want to go ahead and push this retry off a little bit more, maybe retry it a little bit further down the road. So that's the bulk of what Faktory does. Now, some of the advantages of Faktory over Sidekick are things like when I tell it what queues to pull from. This is an array that's actually ordered, and this works in any of the client implementations in any of the languages, where I can say, pull from these queues with this order of preference. So the ones to the farthest left get the highest order of preference, and the ones further right are lower order of preference for pulling jobs. But you can also do interesting things like queue up jobs with priorities. So I can essentially, when I queue a job, I can say, oh, this has got to happen immediately. So I can actually push that, put a piece of metadata on there that gives the job a weight and says, oh, this one is weighted higher. All my other jobs are weighted at 50, but this one's weighted at 10, which means it's higher up in the queue, and it's going to go right into the beginning of it. And that's one of the things that's also very difficult to do with Sidekick based on the way it's implemented against Redis. So there are, I forgot to put it on my slide, but there are actually, if I remember correctly last time I looked, there are currently, officially from Contribsys, there are worker libraries in Ruby and in Golang, which I've shown these two here. There are also, I already saw that there are implementations in JavaScript, Python, Elixir, .NET. I think I saw maybe close to 7 or 8. Like, there's probably one in Rust by now. So people already jumped out very quickly and started writing implementations of these worker libraries in probably any language that you're using. So if you need to use background jobs and you want to use them in your favorite language, Faktory could be a great choice for that. I will mention if anybody's looking to spin up and play with Faktory and you don't necessarily want to do it locally, Jeremy and I have actually recently started a thing called Conglomerate, conglomerate.io, where it's basically a Heroku add-on and a Faktory as a service hosting provider. So you can get a Faktory instance, play with it. You can add it as an add-on on Heroku. That's in alpha testing right now. So if you're interested in playing with it or trying it out, hit us up and we'll get you on the add-on. You can go to conglomerate.io. Huh? Yeah, it's conglomerate with a K because it's Faktory with a K, so it's conglomerate with a K, right? So we're playing along. So go to conglomerate.io and you can sign up with your email address there. We won't spam you, but we will send you Heroku invites as we kind of get this thing moving forward. So any questions about Faktory? Going once? Yep. That's not a weird question. So as you can see, I did this in 2 separate processes, right? A lot of times, right? So, this is all just a locally running example. So it's a local Rails app, and again, just running my local Golang processor right here locally on my laptop. I think in a traditional like Rails type setup, if you're using Sidekick, a lot of times your worker might actually live in your Rails process and just use a different thread or something like that. Obviously, if you're using 2 different languages, that's probably not going to happen. And so realistically, that becomes sort of a choice for you to make on where you want to run it, right? Heroku dynos can be a great choice for workers. They're not great for running server processes like Faktory, but they're great for running limited time one-off dyno or one-off jobs, so they can come to life and do that. As an example, actually going back to the way Conglomerate that I mentioned works, is we actually have that set up as a Rails app running on Heroku for the website, where you actually sign up and do all that. It queues jobs into a Faktory server that we have running in a Kubernetes cluster on GKE. And from there, I've got a worker that also happens to be written in Ruby, but it's written as a Kubernetes pod in a Docker image that runs inside of our Kubernetes cluster and watches and picks up Faktory server jobs. That's actually how we provision other Faktory instances, is by having a Faktory worker that picks up requests and spins them up in the Kubernetes cluster. So there's a lot of different places you can run it. It can run either like in some Kubernetes cluster. It can run in just some process you have on a VM somewhere. But it's wherever you kind of need that process to actually live and just be running constantly. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. All right, so, well, thank you very much.